Okay, so let's have a look at mold making in tin Cure Silicone, which, as I say, is what this is made of. It's a stretchy, flexible molding material for making solid forms in resin, in polyurethane foam, in plaster, in wax, in anything that you want to be a solid, hard form. You want a flexible molding material, and silicone is the go-to generally for these kind of products. This is a tin Cure Silicone. Okay, also known as a condensation cure. Okay, and I don't have a big tub of this to show you actually mixing up the silicone, pouring the silicone, because it's quite a big, quite a messy operation. When I'm back in the workshop, we'll probably do a video on showing you actually the process of mixing it. But if you want to get to grips with that side of it, or if you want to do any of it for your project, just come and have a word with me. We can look at mixing up some silicone and doing some experiments, and helping you to do that with your project. It is totally safe. Okay, it's a very inert material. You can do it at home quite easily. All you need are a set of scales, set of digital scales, a couple of beakers, some coffee stirrers, mixing sticks, and some gloves. For tin Cure Silicone, these can be vinyl gloves or they can be latex gloves. It doesn't make any difference. If you're working with platinum Cure Silicone, you do not want latex gloves. You want vinyl gloves. Platinum Cure Silicone is very, very sensitive to things that will stop it from curing. And uncured silicone is a right pain to remove from anything, so you want to try and avoid cure inhibition in your silicone at all costs, and latex gloves are one of the causes for that. So wear vinyl gloves for platinum Cure. Tin Cure Silicone is a lot less sensitive. It will go off under pretty much any circumstances, so any type of those gloves is fine. A lot of these materials will say that you can mix them by weight or you can mix them by volume. I would always mix them by weight. It's much easier if you've got a digital dial to see that the weights are correct. If you're trying to guess or use your eyes to measure based on a scale on a cup side, it's very difficult to tell whether you've got whether you're doing that accurately or not. So do measure by weight and try and be accurate to within 1 or 2 grams is okay over a batch of 100 grams, but try and be as accurate as you can. Sometimes these chemicals are quite sensitive. The silicones used to be a lot more sensitive. You used to have exactly the right atmospheric conditions, degree of moisture in the air, temperature. You had to measure to 1/10 of a gram accuracy. The chemistry has got a lot better. They're a lot more stable now. So gram accuracy on your scales is what you want. The good thing to do with your scales is to put them into a plastic bag. There you go. Make sure it's not so tight that it's pressing on the scales, but that will just protect them and mean that you can still see the screen, because if we were to pour silicone over the top of this onto a beaker, some of it will go over the sides, it will drip everywhere. It's very sticky, and until it's cured, very difficult to remove. So you want to be able to keep your scales and your equipment nice and clean. Set up your workspace, put a sheet of plastic down to work on top of, so that your work surface is nicely protected. Wear an apron, wear your gloves, make sure that your work surface is nicely set up. And important things when mixing silicone, so once you've weighed out, weigh out your part A your silicone rubber into one cup, measure out your part B, your catalyst, into the second cup. Don't try and put them in the same cup because it's sometimes very easy to over pour your catalyst, and you want to make sure you've got exactly the right amount. So mix them in different beakers, then you can pour your catalyst into your rubber and give it a really good mix, making sure to get the sides and the very bottom of the cup. With the tin Cure silicones, quite often they have a pigment in the catalyst, so you shake your catalyst up fairly thoroughly before you start. You want it to be a nice uniform colour, and sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's black. The stuff that we get is from Easy Composites. It's their basic RTV tin Cure silicone, and it used to come with this blue catalyst colour. Now it comes with a black colour, so you end up with a grey mould. Here's an example. There you go. That's a grey block mould. Okay. So once you've got your poured your catalyst in with your rubber, which will be white or it will be clear, and you start mixing it, and you'll get kind of marble streaky effect. You want that to be a uniform colour, and you want to scrape the sides and the bottom so that when you start pouring it onto your mould, you don't get any marbling, you don't get any white, everything is a uniform colour coming out. If you start seeing white streaks, stop pouring, give it another mix, pour it in again. In terms of creating your mould, the best thing to do is to block up either wood or acrylic with taped sides, leaving about an inch possibly around the outside, depends on the model. This size, I would leave probably about an inch around the outside because it's going to need a bit of flex to get it off, and I don't want it tearing. But if you've got a much bigger model or a much more regular model without all of these undercuts, you can get away with 1 centimetre or 15 mil around the outside. You want to make sure that your mould box, once you've made it, so here's that's the base that's sat on. Here's the sides of my mould box. You want to make sure that it extends a good distance above the model here, because what we will do once we've poured this up to the top here with silicone is we'll pop it in a vacuum chamber that will pull all of the trapped air out from around here and make sure that you don't get any air bubbles. But as you do that, the silicone starts to rise in the chamber, and you want to make sure that you've got room in your mould box for that rising to happen without it overflowing and running down around the outside of the chamber. So just put 15 mil in there and enough space up at the top here. As I say, this can be MDF box, this can be an acrylic box. An acrylic box will give you a nice shiny surface. This was done into acrylic. I don't know if you can see there, it's a very shiny surface. This one was done into an MDF box, but you can't really see from the side there the difference of it. The top surface here is shiny because this was open, so it was poured like this over a frame. If you're doing a two-part mould, you might want to think about setting this into a bed. So if I was doing this model, for example, I probably would do it as a single piece because the silicone will be flexible enough to pull out from all of these indents. But if I was to do it as a two-part, I might decide that I want my mould line to be somewhere like this and possibly going up with the legs here so that it's not a straight line all the way along. I would set that into clay up to that level, make a box around the outside, pour the top, let it go off. If you're in a hurry, you can let it go off, and after a day you can turn it over, remove the clay, you can put a spray wax mould release over the other side, and then pour the second side. But if you aren't in a hurry, the better thing to do is to leave this for 48 hours or preferably longer if you can, in a decent warm environment. Once the silicone has gone off completely, nothing is going to stick to that silicone. If I were to pour a bunch of silicone over the top of this now, I would be able to peel this out no problem. That is sometimes a problem if you are doing a mould that's built up in layers and you want the silicone to adhere to the previous layers you've done. The best thing to do then is to brush a bit of acetone over the surface. That'll re-key the surface of the silicone and subsequent layers will stick to it. But for two-part molds, you can make good use of the fact that nothing will bond to a silicon once it's cured, once it's fully set. So that makes it easier. If you do use a spray release, the thing that you'll see when you start casting it is that you'll get a very, very tiny gap between the two sides, so your mold will slightly distort, whereas if you don't use any mold release, the silicon will peel off this absolutely fine. Things to watch out for if you are creating a model for silicon molding: don't use sulfur-based clays. So some oil-based clays will contain sulfur, and that will stop the silicon from going off. Plasticine is right out. Okay, don't touch plasticine if you're going to do a silicon mold of it. But normal water-based clay or a wax-based clay will be absolutely fine. Epoxy resins will be absolutely fine. Carved woods will be fine, but you'll want to seal the surface when you finish. So put a varnish or a lacquer or something over the top and let it dry completely. You don't want there to be any moisture on your item if you're going to put it into a silicon mold. So we've mixed up our silicon, we've poured it in, it's gone into the vacuum chamber, it's resettled. We're going to leave that. We're not going to touch that for 18 hours. We're also not going to touch, if we can avoid it, the area that we've been mixing in, because there'll be spillages, there'll be a mess. All of that is much easier to clean up after it's cured. Okay, so just walk away, leave it for 18 hours. Don't be tempted to come back and try and demold it early. If you come back to it in about 8-9 hours, you may well find that the top surface of your mold is nice and hard. But if you try and demold it, then you'll find that you can stretch the mold, you can distort it. When you're pulling this out, you'll find bits that haven't gone off properly, and then you'll wreck your mold, and you might well wreck your model in at the same time. So you need to be patient, and you need to wait for the silicon to go off properly. Then you can demold it. The silicon is quite easy to flex and peel away. If you can't get your model out, if you poured this as a one piece and you find that you can't get it out, using a sharp scalpel, you can cut. This is what I've done here. So this is a mold for a long, thin piece, and I knew that I was going to have to cut this mold, but actually, as long as I've got that back into a box, it's going to be as if I've poured it in two parts. So with a nice sharp scalpel, you can cut along the outside. Don't cut all the way down, cut just as far as you need to release it, so that you've got locations, so your mold is not going to slide past itself. It's lined up properly. Make sure that goes into a box. If you can, when you are casting into a silicon mold, put it back into the box that you molded it in. It's not always possible. But if you can, either make one that's the same size or put it back into the same box. That will make sure that it's not twisting, it's not distorting when you're putting the resin in, it's not flexing in places that it's not supposed to. If you're doing a fairly thick box mold, and you've got lots of thickness of material here, just a couple of elastic bands around the outside will be enough to hold it together. And then you can pour your resin, and we'll look at that in the next video. Once you've finished with your mold, they're not going to go off. You can keep them. They do degrade over time, so if you take 50 casts from this, you might find that it starts to wear out, it starts to get hard, starts to get brittle, bits start to pull out, particularly if you've got lots of spiky bits or undercuts on your models. But you can keep these for several years and they'll be absolutely fine. If you are totally sure that you're finished with it, chop it up into bits, and you can put it in any waste disposal. You can put it in your food waste if you want, because this is silicon is basically made from sand, and it does biodegrade. It does break down back into constituent parts, but you can also use it to fill out other big molds. If you've got big voids in molds, if you chop this up with a pair of scissors, you can use this silicon to fill gaps in future molds. Only in tin cure. Don't put this in platinum cure, Platinum Cure moulds. Platinum Cure reacts very badly in contact with tin cure stuff. So if you are doing Platinum Cure casting, don't do it from tin moulds. You can do it the other way around. You can do tin from platinum, but you can't do platinum from tin. So that is that's a quick overview of silicon molding. As I say, I will try and get some a video of some mixes done when we're back, and then we will move on to looking at some other flexible forms in the next video.